Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today is Thursday, January 29th, 2026. And if you are waking up in New York City right now, or even just seeing the clips rolling in on your feed from somewhere else, the energy here it's shifted.
It's absolutely shifted. And it's not just the winter chill you're talking about.
No, not at all. I mean, the whole atmospheric pressure in the city has changed. We're just about 4 weeks, not even, into the new administration.
Right. And the transition from former Mayor Eric Adams to the newly inaugurated Mayor Zohran Mamdani is, calling it a transition feels a little too polite.
That's a good way to put it. It feels more like a philosophical U-turn at 80 miles an hour.
Absolutely. There's no gradual curve here.
It really is something. We've gone from what was called the Swider administration, very focused on law and order, nightlife mayors, a very visible police focus.
A return to a certain kind of old school NYC politics in a way.
Exactly. And now we've pivoted to a democratic socialist administration that is, they're openly questioning the very foundations of how this city defines public safety.
And this isn't happening in a calm, stable environment. We have to set the stage here because the context is everything.
It is.
The city is grappling with a budget hole that has economists genuinely terrified. We're talking $12 billion.
$12 billion. Let that number sink in.
And at the same time, you have a new, very aggressive federal administration under President Trump that is putting immense pressure on so-called sanctuary cities.
The rhetoric is back, and it's louder than ever.
Louder than ever. And then you bring it down from the 30,000-foot view to the street level. And in neighborhoods like Corona, Jackson Heights, you have this visible crisis that no amount of political spin can hide.
And that's exactly where we want to go today. We're looking at that exact point where all these high-level abstract theories just crash right into the pavement.
Yeah.
We're going to Roosevelt Avenue in Queens. It's been called the market of bodies.
It's a heavy, heavy topic. Yeah. But it's also the perfect lens, I think, to understand what is happening to New York right now.
How so?
Because on that one street, that one corridor, you have the migrant crisis, you have the fierce debate over sex work versus trafficking, you have the evolution of sophisticated organized crime, and you have the safety of our children all tangled up into one incredibly complex knot.
And to try and untangle that knot, we have a massive stack of sources in front of us today. We've got the latest NYPD CompStat reports from the last year, transcripts from those incredibly spicy 2025 mayoral debates.
Oh, they were something else.
Weren't they? We also have a deep analysis of Operation Restore Roosevelt, and then some data from the 2025 Child Trafficking Prevention Conference that is, frankly, terrifying to read.
And policy documents from the Mamdani transition team, which give us a roadmap of where they think they're going.
Right. So we're going to try and answer the core questions here. What is actually happening on the ground? Is the new mayor really going to legalize prostitution like his opponents claimed? Or is that just a political myth?
And maybe the most important question of all, in a city that is changing this fast, with all these pressures, how do we keep the kids safe?
So buckle up. Let's dive in.
Let's do it.
Okay, I want to start with the visuals, because I think if you don't live in Jackson Heights or Corona or maybe parts of Sunset Park in Brooklyn, you might just see the headlines and think, okay, New York is a little gritty again. But that doesn't capture it.
No, it doesn't. We've pulled descriptions from, everywhere. Right. Resident complaints on forums like Reddit, investigative reports from places like City Limits, even the New York Times. And the picture they all paint of Roosevelt Avenue it's wild.
It's a very specific area we're talking about, right?
It is. We're talking about a corridor roughly from 74th Street up to 111th. And the descriptions, what's so striking, is how consistent they are across all these different sources. This isn't just one or two people loitering. It is, as you said, described as an open-air marketplace.
One of the reports we looked at detailed women soliciting in broad daylight. The phrase they used was standing against walls, literally every few feet.
Right. And it's not just that they're standing there. The reports talk about the aggression, the sheer density of it.
And it's a two-pronged thing, isn't it? You have this street-based solicitation, and then you have the storefronts.
Exactly. The so-called massage parlors, which are just these very thinly veiled brothels. But the thing that really struck me reading through all the source material was the resident sentiment.
Yeah.
These aren't political operatives with an agenda. These are parents. These are families who have lived there for decades.
There was this one Reddit thread we dissected from the Jackson Heights community page. A resident described their morning walk to school. And just, Try to put yourself in this situation for a second.
Mhm.
You're walking your 7-year-old child to elementary school at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you have to navigate what this person called a gauntlet.
A gauntlet. I mean, that word implies a physical struggle, a fight to get through.
It does. They described constant catcalling. Men in cars slowing down, yelling, "Chicas, chicas," at any woman who walks by, regardless of her age, what she's wearing.
Just anyone.
Anyone. This resident said they now have to cross the street or take this long detour through side streets just to avoid their child seeing public sex acts or really aggressive solicitation.
They used the phrase no-go zone, and that is such a powerful and frankly dangerous phrase for a city to hear.
It is.
When residents, everyday people, feel like they have lost control of their own neighborhood, that they can't even use the public sidewalk, that creates a massive political pressure cooker. It creates a demand for action.
But see, this is the part that I think confuses me and probably confuses a lot of our listeners.
Yeah.
Didn't we just have action? Didn't we just have a huge crackdown?
You're talking about Operation Restore Roosevelt.
Yes. I vividly remember it. It was late 2024, ran all through 2025. Then Mayor Adams and Councilmember Francisco Moya, they went in hard. There were these big press conferences, police raids, the whole spectacle.
They absolutely did. And if you just look at the statistics that the Adams administration put out at the time, on paper, it looked like a massive victory.
What were the numbers?
The claims were nearly 1,000 arrests. Something like 11,500 summonses issued. And they shut down 18 locations with vacate orders, brothels, illegal sex shops, that kind of thing.
Okay, so if they arrested 1,000 people and they padlocked 18 brothels, why are we sitting here in January of 2026 talking about the exact same problem, maybe even worse?
Because we have to look at who they arrested. And this is where we need to get really technical with the data we pulled, because the headline number, that big 1,000 arrests number, it hides the reality of the situation.
So break it down for us. What does the NYPD data actually show?
We analyzed the arrest data from that period, and something like 65% of those arrests were for charges like prostitution or loitering for the purpose of prostitution.
Okay, so they're arresting the women on the street. The sellers.
Exactly, the workers. But here's the kicker, and this is the data point that changes the whole story. Only about 4%, 4 of those arrests were for promoting prostitution.
4%. Wait, clarify the legal difference for us. What's the distinction?
So prostitution is the charge for the person engaging in the sex act for money, the worker. Promoting prostitution is the charge for the pimp, the manager, the person organizing it, the landlord who knowingly rents out the space, the person making the real money and holding the power.
So you're telling me that out of 1,000 arrests, they only managed to catch, what, 40 managers? 40 pimps.
That's it. And that right there, that single statistic explains why the residents feel like nothing has changed.
Because it's a revolving door.
It's a revolving door. You can arrest 900 women. But if the management structure, the trafficking network, the supply chain, the people holding the debt, if that is left completely intact, what do you think they do?
They just find 900 new women.
They find 900 new women. Or, what's even more likely, they bail out the women who are arrested and immediately put them back to work on the same street corner to pay off the new legal fees they've just incurred.
So the crackdown was just cosmetic. It was like mowing the lawn but leaving all the roots in the ground.
Precisely. And the critics we've read, advocates for the workers, argue it was actually worse than cosmetic. It was actively harmful.
How so?
Because by arresting the workers, who are overwhelmingly immigrant women, primarily Asian and Latina women, you're stripping them of their only source of income. You push them into the court system. You saddle them with a criminal record.
Which makes it almost impossible to get a legitimate job later on.
Right. Think about it. If you are an undocumented woman and now you have a prostitution charge on your record, your options for legal employment, which were already basically zero, are now completely gone. So where do you go?
Right back to the street.
Right back to the street. The sources all indicate that this trade is incredibly resilient. The moment the police presence recedes, the market just pops right back up, almost instantly, because the underlying economic desperation driving it hasn't changed one bit.
You know, that brings up a really dark angle to this that became a huge issue during the mayoral election. The fear wasn't just about the women on the street. It was about the kind of people the city was attracting. Do you remember all the sex tourism warnings?
Oh, absolutely. This was a massive talking point for opponents like Andrew Cuomo and Curtis Sliwa during the campaign against Mamdani.
I remember reading this one Fox News article from the campaign trail where Sliwa was just hammering this point. warning that New York was on the verge of becoming the prostitution capital of America.
It wasn't just empty rhetoric, though. It was tapping into a very specific, and I think for a lot of people, a very real fear. They were talking about the manosphere.
I feel like that term gets thrown around a lot. Let's define it in this context, because we're not just talking about men in general, right?
No, not at all. When we talk about the manosphere in the context of this debate, we're talking about a very specific decentralized network of online communities. Blogs, forums, subreddits, private Discord channels.
What's the focus?
The focus is on a certain brand of masculinity, a lot of anti-feminism, and very often the commodification of women.
Like the old pickup artist forums.
That's a part of it, for sure. But more specifically, there are what they call hobbyist forums, where men review sex workers like they're reviewing a restaurant on Yelp.
You're kidding.
I'm not. They share prices, they share locations, they share menus of available services, and they give each other real-time warnings about police activity in certain areas.
And the fear is that these forums, these global communities, are buzzing about New York City.
Exactly. The argument from the opposition was that if you move toward a policy of decriminalization, or even just what we have now, which is kind of de facto non-enforcement, you are basically sending up a flare to this global community of sex buyers.
You're signaling that New York is open for business.
That's the fear. That you are effectively inducing demand.
Yeah.
That by being perceived as soft on this issue, you are essentially importing sex tourists from all over the country, all over the world.
And that idea just clashes so violently with a whole community safety narrative that the new mayor is trying to build. He says he wants a safe city for families, but his opponents are arguing his policies are creating a playground for exploitation.
It's the central conflict of his entire platform.
Well, let's talk about that new mayor, Zohran Mamdani. He was inaugurated on January 1st. He's a democratic socialist, and his view of the world is, it's safe to say, about 180 degrees different from Eric Adams's.
It is. And to really understand his policy on an issue like what's happening on Roosevelt Avenue, you have to first understand his core philosophy. He repeated this line constantly on the campaign trail.
I remember it. Safety is not just the absence of crime,
No,
but the presence of resources. It's the bedrock of his entire approach to governance.
Which is a great slogan. It sounds good. But, and this is a huge but, we are looking at a $12 billion budget hole. How do you resource safety when the city is effectively broke? That is the $12 billion question, isn't it? But Mamdani isn't backing down. In fact, he's doubling down. He's proposing a massive structural change to city government. He wants to create a brand new agency.
The Department of Community Safety, or DCS.
That's it. And I was looking at the proposal for this. It's huge. The proposed budget is $1.1 billion.
Which is, what, about 10% of the entire NYPD budget, effectively being moved from one column to another.
It's a massive reallocation of funds and, more importantly, of philosophy. The idea is to consolidate all the violence prevention programs and social services into one powerful agency.
So instead of a police first response to, say, a mental health crisis on the subway or a homeless encampment,
you send in the DCS. You send in social workers, clinicians, outreach specialists. The goal is to stop relying on people with guns and handcuffs to solve problems that are fundamentally about poverty, health, and housing.
And they're not just changing the response, they're changing the infrastructure. Instead of police precincts, the proposal talks about creating youth justice hubs.
Right. The idea is to have these offices open 24/7 in every single borough. The whole strategy is to interrupt violence before it happens with social work, rather than just responding to it with arrests after the fact.
Okay, but I want to pause on the specific policy regarding sex work, because this got so muddled during the election. There was so much confusion, so much deliberate misinformation.
You're thinking of that AI-generated ad Cuomo's team put out.
Yes, the one with the cartoonish pimp character.
That was quite a moment in the history of political advertising. It was grotesque, but it was effective because it highlighted the core attack line that Mamdani wants to legalize prostitution.
And we really need to clear this up, because I feel like people use the words legalization and decriminalization interchangeably, at dinner parties or online, but in terms of policy, they are worlds apart.
They are completely different, and we need to be very precise here. Think of it like this. Legalization is the cannabis dispensary model.
Okay, that makes sense.
In a fully legalized system, the state acts as the regulator. You would have licensed brothels. They would pay sales tax. The health department inspector would come by on Tuesdays to check on conditions. The city would use zoning laws to decide where you can and can't open your business. It becomes a formal, regulated business sector.
Like in parts of Nevada.
Exactly like Nevada. Now, decriminalization is totally different. It's more like, think of it like jaywalking in a city that has just decided to stop writing tickets for it.
The law might still be on the books, but nobody's enforcing it.
Right. The act isn't turned into a business that the state sanctions and stamps with its approval. It's just an activity that the police and the courts stop punishing people for.
So just to be crystal clear, under Mamdani's plan, there wouldn't be a New York City Department of Sex Work issuing licenses for brothels on Fifth Avenue.
No, absolutely not. And this is crucial. He has been very explicit on this point in the policy papers we've reviewed. He does not support legalization. He seems to reject the idea of the state becoming a financial beneficiary of the sex trade through taxes.
So what does he actually want then?
He supports what's been called the de Blasio approach, but he wants to codify it and expand it. It's effectively decriminalization through a policy of non-prosecution.
Okay.
You officially direct the DAs and the NYPD to stop prosecuting the sex workers, the sellers, and you refocus all of your law enforcement resources on the traffickers, the pimps, and anyone committing violence against the workers.
Sex work is work. That's the slogan, right? I remember he used that a lot back when he was in the state assembly.
That's the one. He views this primarily through a lens of economic necessity. His argument is that if you arrest the worker, you're not fighting crime, you're just criminalizing poverty. That's his fundamental stance.
So his plan for Roosevelt Avenue isn't to send in the NYPD to round everyone up again.
No. His plan is to target the exploiters while simultaneously flooding the area with social services and resources for the women.
And we are already seeing early signs of this philosophical shift, aren't we? I was looking at his transition team website, and he's appointed several leaders from the Legal Aid Society to key posts.
That is a very, very strong signal. Legal aid has been at the forefront of defense-oriented justice reform for decades. Putting their people in charge of your transition team tells the NYPD and the city's district attorneys that the priority is now on defense and protecting rights, not just on racking up prosecution stats.
Plus, the executive orders he signed in his first week, the one to finally end solitary confinement in city jails.
Which is huge for the population on Rikers Island.
Huge. And the other big one, moving away from what he called the emergency shelter framework for migrants and towards finding permanent housing solutions.
Which brings us directly to the elephant in the room. You simply cannot have an honest conversation about Roosevelt Avenue or the sex trade in New York City in 2026 without talking about the migrant crisis.
The numbers are just staggering. We looked at the latest city data. Since the spring of 2022, we've had over 229,000 asylum seekers arrive in the city.
229,000. And the single most critical piece of data here is about work authorization, or more accurately, the complete lack thereof.
Right. If you're an asylum seeker, you can't legally work for months, sometimes years after you arrive. So if you can't work legally, you have to find work illegally.
Precisely. And what we are seeing, what all the reports from the ground confirm, is the creation of a massive survival sex economy.
What does the demographic data show? Who is being pulled into this?
The reports we analyzed indicate a very high prevalence of recent migrants from Venezuela, Honduras, and Ecuador involved in the street-based sex work, especially in Queens. And then you have the Asian migrant population, which tends to be more concentrated in the indoor massage parlor settings.
You know, I want to push back a little on this economic necessity argument just for a second.
Yeah.
Because when we look at the source material on organized crime, it feels insufficient. Are we really saying that members of violent transnational gangs like Trendy Aragua are just economic migrants looking for a way to pay the rent? Or are we dealing with sophisticated violent predators?
That is the absolute core of the tension. And you're right to be skeptical of a simple "it's just a job" narrative, because the data from the Department of Justice reports we analyzed paints a much, much darker picture than just "I need to pay my rent this month."
Because I'm reading about concepts like debt bondage in these federal files, and that does not sound like a job search. That sounds like modern slavery.
It is modern slavery, but you have to understand the mechanism because it's insidiously clever. The debt is the shackle.
Explain that.
A woman in, say, Ecuador might agree to come to New York City willingly. She's not kidnapped. She wants to come. She wants to work. She wants to send money home.
Mm-hmm.
But the coyote, the smuggler who arranges the trip, charges her, let's say, $20,000 for the journey.
A sum of money she could never possibly have.
Of course not. So she arrives in Queens and suddenly she's told, welcome to America, you owe us 20 grand. And by the way, the interest rate is 100%. And until you pay it all off, you work where we tell you to work, when we tell you to work.
So she has no choice. She's trapped.
She has zero leverage. And because she's undocumented, she can't go to the police. This is where the whole sanctuary city debate gets incredibly messy and complicated.
Because Mamdani's policy is to protect her from being deported by ICE.
But the gangs and the traffickers use that very fear of deportation as a weapon to keep her silent. They tell her, if you go to the cops, if you make any trouble, they won't help you. They'll just call ICE and you'll be sent back home and your family will have to pay your debt.
The sophistication of these criminal networks is what really shocked me in the source material. The reports mention things like drop houses. Can you explain the logistics of that?
It's chilling. These are just nondescript residential homes or apartments, often right there in the neighborhoods of Queens, that are used to warehouse newly arrived migrants or trafficking victims.
Warehouse them.
That's the term they use. They are distribution centers for human beings. They hold people there until they are assigned a location to work, a street corner, a massage parlor, a construction site.
And it goes beyond that.
Oh, way beyond. The sources also detailed sophisticated money laundering operations running through small, informal casinos, real estate, even nail salons. This isn't just a few guys on a corner. This is a multinational business enterprise with a complex supply chain.
And it's an enterprise that's operating in a city that is now in a direct, high-stakes standoff with the federal government.
Right, because we have to remember it's 2026. President Trump is back in the White House.
And one of his first actions was to reissue executive orders threatening to cut off all federal funding to sanctuary cities. He's encouraging policies like involuntary commitment for the homeless.
And Mayor Mamdani's response is basically, bring it on. His administration has made it clear they will refuse to cooperate with ICE for any civil immigration enforcement. So you have this incredibly high-stakes game of chicken playing out.
So the city is trying to protect undocumented immigrants from deportation.
But that same protection creates this gray zone, this legal shield that traffickers can operate behind with less fear of a sudden federal raid.
So if the feds were to raid one of these drop houses you mentioned, the city of New York might actually be in a position of politically opposing that raid.
Politically, yes. It's a massive conflict. Look at the attempted raid on Canal Street that was mentioned in the sources. The mayor wants to protect residents from what he sees as overreach by ICE, but the traffickers are experts at using that shield to hide their criminal operations.
And caught right in the middle of all of this, between the gangs, the city, the feds, are the kids.
That is the most heartbreaking part of all the research we did for this. It's just devastating.
The source material from the Child Trafficking Prevention Conference it was genuinely hard to read. We tend to have this outdated image of trafficking that it's someone getting snatched in a white van off the street.
That's not how it works anymore. The white van is obsolete. It's clumsy. Why risk abducting a child off the street in public when you can just walk right into their bedroom through their iPad?
They specifically mentioned Roblox, TikTok, Fortnite. These aren't obscure, dark websites. These are the most popular apps in the world for children.
It's what the experts are calling the digital battlefield. Traffickers are actively grooming prepubescent kids, and we're talking 9, 10, 11 years old, inside the chat rooms of these games.
Walk me through that. If I'm a parent listening to this right now, what does this actually look like on my kid's screen? How does it start?
It almost always starts with what experts call transactional generosity. Your 10-year-old is playing a game like Roblox. Another user who has created an avatar that looks just like another kid approaches them in the game. They send a message. Hey, I have extra Robux, that's the in-game currency, or I have this rare skin for your character, do you want it?
And of course, every kid wants the rare skin.
Every kid. It triggers an immediate dopamine hit. It feels good, they accept the gift, and right there, a psychological debt has been created. The groomer then immediately works to move the conversation off the moderated game platform and onto a private channel like Discord or Snapchat.
Away from any prying eyes or moderation filters.
Exactly. And that's when the trap begins to shut. That's when what the sources call the danger window opens up.
The sources flagged that specific time of day, from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m.
Right. It's the critical gap between when school ends and when most parents get home from work. That is when these private messages light up. And the nature of the request changes. It becomes, hey, I gave you that skin. I did you a favor. Now I need you to do something for me. Just send me a picture. It's no big deal. Just a picture of your face.
It always starts small. Innocuous.
Always.
Yeah.
But once they have that one picture, they have the leverage for blackmail. Send me another one or I'll share this one with all your friends at school. It is sophisticated psychological entrapment, and it is happening while the child is sitting on their own living room couch.
So what is Mamdani's plan for this? Because he obviously can't ban Roblox.
No, but his administration's theory is that he can fill that time gap. He can eliminate the danger window.
Yeah.
This is where the youth justice hubs and the YFAC centers come into play.
YFAC TS. What does that stand for again?
It stands for youth, family, and community. The entire idea is to create these safe, welcoming spaces that aren't police stations and aren't just schools. They're places for mentorship, art therapy, sports, social services.
They're just keeping the lights on late. I saw in the proposals they want to dramatically expand programs like Saturday Night Lights.
Which is basically just opening up school gyms for basketball and other sports on weekend nights to keep kids off the street.
And also Fair Futures.
Right, which is an intensive coaching program specifically for youth in the foster care system. And this is so critical because the data is unambiguous. Kids in foster care are incredibly vulnerable to trafficking. The moment you age out of the system at 18 without a support network, the predators are literally waiting for you at the door.
But Mamdani is also pushing for something much broader and much more controversial inside the schools themselves, right?
Yeah.
This whole child approach.
This is a big one. He wants to move away from using school safety agents, who are, we should remember, employees of the NYPD, and replace them with social workers and what they're calling school response clinicians.
So the idea is if a kid gets into a fight or is acting out, instead of calling a cop to the classroom, you call a mental health clinician.
That's the goal. It's a shift to what's called trauma-informed care. The argument is that many of these kids, especially the tens of thousands of migrant children who have arrived from war-torn countries or after incredibly traumatic journeys, are acting out because of trauma, not because they're criminals.
And then there's the universal childcare piece of this puzzle. Free childcare for every child under the age of 5.
That's the long-term economic pillar of the whole strategy. If you provide free, reliable childcare, parents can work stable jobs. If parents can work stable jobs, they are far less likely to fall into the desperate survival sex economy we talked about earlier. It's a generational prevention strategy.
It all sounds very logical on paper. It's a cohesive vision. But I want to go back to the policy debate around prostitution itself. Because even within the progressive movement, there is a massive fight happening. This isn't a simple left versus right issue.
Oh, not at all. It's a civil war within the progressive movement. You have the full decriminalization side versus the Nordic model side, and they are diametrically opposed.
Let's break this down for everyone. Mamdani, back when he was in the state assembly, was a vocal supporter of a bill called Cecilia's Law.
Right. That represents the full decriminalization approach. If passed, it would remove all criminal penalties for the workers, for the buyers, and for the managers.
Wait, hang on. Even the managers.
Yeah.
Even the pimps.
That is the single most controversial part of the bill, and it's the main criticism from the other side. The argument from the full decrime advocates is that you can't define pimp or manager clearly enough in the law without accidentally criminalizing people who are just helping each other survive.
Like what?
Like roommates who share an apartment where work happens, or a boyfriend who acts as a driver, or other sex workers who team up for safety. Their core argument is that any police interaction is the harm. They believe workers need full labor rights so they can call OSHA about unsafe conditions or call the police if they're assaulted without fearing that they themselves will be arrested.
Okay, so that's one side. What's the other side of this progressive civil war?
The other side is a bill called the Sex Trade Survivors Justice and Equality Act. This is the Nordic model, which gets its name because it was first implemented in countries like Sweden, Norway, and France.
And who supports this?
This approach is supported by a lot of anti-trafficking feminists and groups led by survivors of the sex trade, like the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women.
How is their proposal different?
It's a completely different theory of the case. The Nordic model decriminalizes the seller, so the woman on the corner would face no criminal charges. But it keeps, and often increases, the criminal penalties for the buyer, the John, and for the pimp or trafficker.
So you try to cut off the demand.
That's the entire theory. You say, as a society, we are not going to arrest the victim, who is often a vulnerable woman in a desperate situation, but we are going to make it unequivocally illegal to buy her body. Their argument is that you cannot have gender equality in a society where human bodies are for sale as a commodity. They view prostitution as inherently exploitative, not as work.
So where is New York City right now? Because as far as I know, neither of these sweeping state-level bills has actually passed, right?
No, we are in a de facto reality. We're in a legal gray zone. The laws criminalizing prostitution still exist on the books, but the district attorneys, especially in Manhattan and Brooklyn, and now with a directive coming from City Hall, are simply not enforcing them against the workers.
But at the same time, they aren't fully cracking down on the buyers either, not in a consistent citywide way.
No. And so you get what many people argue is the worst of all possible worlds. You have the visible public disorder that residents hate, the open market on Roosevelt Avenue, but you don't have any of the protections for workers that would come with a regulated, decriminalized system. Nor do you have the focused enforcement on demand that would come with the Nordic model.
And there's one other character in this whole story that we haven't talked about enough. The landlord, the property owner.
Ah, yes. The landlord dilemma. This is a fascinating and often overlooked piece of the puzzle. Under New York's penal law 230.4u, a landlord faces serious legal risks for permitting prostitution on their property.
So if they even suspect that one of their tenants might be a sex worker, they have an incentive to evict them immediately.
A massive incentive, or they could face criminal charges themselves. This leads to rampant housing discrimination. A woman might just be living her life, but if she looks a certain way, or if she keeps odd hours, or if she has male visitors, a landlord might preemptively kick her out just to protect himself from legal trouble.
Which pushes her where?
Right back to the drop house. Right back under the control of the pimp who controls the housing. Right back onto the street.
It's a completely vicious cycle.
It is, and Mamdani's gamble, and let's be absolutely clear, this is a massive city-altering gamble, is that by addressing the root cause of poverty, he can break that cycle.
He is betting that policies like rent freezes, free buses, and universal child care will do more to clean up Roosevelt Avenue in the long run than 1,000 more police raids ever could.
That is the bet. That is the entire experiment. But the risks are just monumental. If this new Department of Community Safety fails to reduce the visible disorder, if people still feel unsafe walking their kids to school, the city could face a complete crisis of confidence in his leadership.
And if President Trump follows through on his threat and actually cuts off federal funding to the city because of its sanctuary status,
then the very resources that Mamdani is counting on to build this new social safety net they evaporate. And then you're left with a city with no money, a policy of non-enforcement from the police, and a massive, unchecked human trafficking crisis.
that is a truly terrifying thought. So, okay, let's bring this all back to the listener.
Yeah.
If you're a parent in New York City right now listening to this, what is the practical takeaway?
The practical takeaway is vigilance. The digital space is the new street corner. It just is. You have to know who your kids are talking to on Roblox and TikTok. You have to understand that the old stranger danger talk needs to be updated for their iPad, not just for the neighborhood playground.
And what about for the resident who is just tired? The person who is tired of the grit and just wants to be able to walk down 82nd Street in peace.
I think for them, it's about understanding that the quick fix of cleaning up the streets through mass arrests often just moves the problem around or makes it worse. We saw that with Operation Restore Roosevelt. You arrest the women, they come right back. Unless you solve the underlying issues of debt bondage and the lack of work authorization, the market will always find a way to reappear.
And for the voter, for every New Yorker watching this unfold,
You are watching a real-time, high-stakes experiment in redefining the very concept of public safety. Is safety a badge and a gun? Or is safety a set of keys to a stable apartment and a free spot in a daycare center? We are going to find out, one way or another.
that really is the central question of the next 4 years.
Yeah.
I want to leave you, our listeners, with one final thought, something to chew on. We've talked a lot about supply and demand. The supply of sex work on a place like Roosevelt Avenue is, as we've discussed, clearly driven by the desperation of a migrant population with no other options. The demand is driven by a culture that sees these women as disposable commodities.
And the question is, can a mayor, any mayor, really fix either of those fundamental forces without comprehensive federal immigration reform on the one hand and a massive cultural shift on the other?
Or is New York City destined to remain a sanctuary that struggles to provide actual safety?
That is the reality we are all living in right now.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. All of these issues, immigration, sex work, the safety of our youth, they are all connected by that single powerful thread of economic survival.
Keep asking the hard questions.
We'll see you next time.